Okay, moving on to the first keynote by SecuvyAI on Unsupervised Machine Learning, Revolutionizing Sensitive Data Discovery for Privacy and Security. May I call upon the stage Vaibhav Mehrotra, Chief Executive Officer, to deliver the keynote. Over to you, Vaibhav.
Okay. So, hello everyone. I'm the CEO of Secuvy. So what we do is we are basically a data privacy and security company, and we help companies in privacy compliance and solving their data security issues. So today we'll be talking about on some of the challenges, like all these privacy laws that are coming in, like especially in India, it's DPDP Act. So around how to discover this data and the challenges around that, and why it is complex. And there's a lot of talk about discovering this data and then classifying it and so on. And specifically, as this data is growing, what is the importance of AI? And specifically talking about unsupervised machine learning here. So if you look at it, how it all starts, I was talking to some of the industry leaders in this conference, there's a lot of talk about discovering the data and so on. So the challenge is how do you discover very effectively, right? How do you know that you are discovering the complete picture of the data? You're not missing out on the shadow IT systems or shadow data around that, right? So there's a big challenge around it. If you're using some legacy systems around that, there's always a challenge using regex and so on. And that's where some of the AI capabilities come in. Now, once you discover the data, what you need to do is you need to classify the data, you need to create an inventory of that, and you need to define the attack surface on that. If you have discovered and classified, what's next around that? That's where your next landscape of data security comes in. Now, once you have, when you talk about from the privacy landscape, right, once you have discovered the data and classified it, now some of the things and the capabilities that you need to build is how you can fulfill your DSR requirements or data subject requirements per se as per GDPR. Now the challenge is that finding PII or PHI data, it's somewhere a solved problem like in the old school days. But when it comes to finding this individual data, let's say I want to find in say petabytes of data, that can you tell me Anil's data in that, a very specific person, that makes it complex, because you have all kinds of data sitting out there. So fulfilling DSRs and automating that, that's a complex thing, and it's challenging for organizations today. And lastly, not the last, is how do you comply with that, right? Okay, you discover the data, you create an inventory, you fulfill the DSRs, but it just doesn't end there. You have your assessment piece around that, right? Now, what happens today is a lot of these assessments are done manually. Like when you talk about PIAs and ROPAs, right? So you're doing it the organizations come in and they do manual assessments around that. There is a part of the piece where you can actually automate some of those things. When you look at the data set, you discover it, how you can inculcate and feed that data in your PIAs as the data landscape is changing in your organization. So that's another thing that what organizations needs to look today, where they're doing it completely manually, that how effectively, to a certain extent, they can automate their PIs and ROPAs as the data is changing. Because the challenge is with PIAs, when you do assessments, you do an assessment today. Now what happens is the data is coming into your organization very rapidly. So by the time, say a week or 2 weeks or a month, that PIA is already old. So how do you automate some of those workflows? That's where how you comply with some of these requirements around that. So we talked about the data problem from the privacy lens, what needs to be done, what are the challenges around it. But the challenge is a lot of organizations don't even know how much data they have in their organization. So they are shadow IT data, which I was talking about. In general, you have these systems that you are connected and you are scanning and finding the data. But what about those systems that you don't even know what data is there, what systems are there, and what data is coming into those systems? These are some of the data statistics, what we see in the market when we interview and talk. Now, as well as if you look at the enterprise data, how it is continuing is it's 2.5 exabyte per day globally. That's the amount of data that is increasing. And just to add to that, I was just reading recently, it was mentioned that 20% of world's data is being generated in India. So that is a level of complexity India will face in times to come. Now, when we talk about the data, you look at data in your databases, siloed, and your SaaS apps and so on, but you're not even aware of it, the amount of data you have, it's 7x of the data that is actually sitting. Now, how it is sitting there? You have marketing system tools where, you're doing surveys and all of that, your HR systems, which are not connected in some ways, and so on, where you are storing the data. Or say you're a healthcare system, like a hospital, right? So if you are doing some marketing of your hospital, right, you are actually reaching out to the consumers. And when you reach out to the consumers, you're storing all of their data around that. And you're not even aware of it that you're storing in your systems, and you need to comply with that. Now, what happens is, if you look at the data breaches, what are happening is, so we are seeing a big push, especially in COVID days, there was a big push to move into the cloud, and there was no way to do it everything on-prem, so there was a big push around that. Now, what we see is 82% of your data breaches are happening in cloud today. And as we see a lot of misconfiguration in S3 buckets, right, that's all in your public clouds that is happening there. Now, with that, when you look at all these cloud systems, these are all unstructured sources. Unstructured data is getting accumulated. Now, when the unstructured data is there, it's very hard to classify that data, understand the data, and correlate the data. So it brings another level of complexity as you are embracing cloud in your organizations. Now, also, there's a recent survey by IBM that they said, per data attribute, if you have a data breach, you can expect the cost to that is $165. So if you think that, you have, let's say, 50 terabytes of data gets breached, or maybe much less, I'm just making it more, what could be the impact on your organization in terms of fines which these privacy laws bring in? Now, what happens is, let's talk about, now go into the machine learning techniques around that, how we solve this problem as we are entering this. So there are two techniques if you look at it in the AI world when we talk about supervised versus unsupervised learning techniques. Now what happens is, in supervised learning world, so what it happens, you take the model and you deploy that model in your systems. And these are pre-trained models. So that is what it is called supervised learning. That means you're supervising it, you're learning it, you're pre-training, and then you're deploying that data set to scan that data. That is what supervised learning is all about. Now the challenge with that is, say you deploy those supervised learning models to do data scanning. Now once you scan that data, it's only good for only that data set. Now say a new data is coming in your organization, how do you track that data? So supervised learning models fail there. And this has not even been talked about much in the AI world or per se. Every organization look for, oh, I need a data discovery product. But what does it mean when you look for a data discovery product and you want to inventorize and classify the data? And you say hey, I bought a tool which is AI-driven data discovery product. Now the challenge is as data is growing, these supervised learning models are struggling into that. Now what you do is, you deploy this model, you scan the data, and they can find only those data attributes. When new data is coming in, which is completely new in your organization, those models cannot detect that data. But per se, you say, hey, I have a product, a tool, which can detect and scan all the data, but you are missing out on that because you are not detecting those new data sets in that. Now, what unsupervised learning does is it's basically these are base models. You take that base model, you deploy and start scanning. You don't need to pre-train those models as per se. What it means is, once you have installed that model And as you are scanning, it's learning your system. And it's learning your system, it means like you're connecting your SaaS apps, your databases, your file shares, all those systems. Now, as it's learning your environment, it's detecting that what attributes, patterns are there in your systems. What it means like by patterns. So what it does is, it look for the patterns, let's say your OneDrive or your Google Drive, you have documents in your systems. What it will do is, it will look for the patterns in those documents and start labeling that data. And once the new data comes in, what it does is, it look for those patterns and start detecting those new data sets and start correlating that data. So in that way, as your organization is embracing new data sets, it's learning over a period of time. So you don't need to, again, go back and pre-train those models as per supervised learning, which is a lot of cumbersome and hassle. And you don't miss out on data sets, which is extremely important in the privacy world. Because if you miss data and you get DSR request, you are sending only subset of data to the data subject, which is you're technically not privacy compliant. So that's like, if you talk about unsupervised and supervised, that's the difference between these two techniques. And a lot of current solutions are focused on supervised learning. It's not like they couldn't do it. It's basically, it's a technique which was used for a few years. Now AI space is evolving rapidly, we all know that. Now, as I was just talking about unsupervised learning here. So if you look at it like, when you deploy all these models with unsupervised learning, say, let's take an example here. You have a OneDrive where you have a lot of Aadhaar cards. In that multiple documents in your OneDrive with Aadhaar cards, now you have a lot of people sitting there, like you have employees, like so you have 1,000 employees in the company. Now, if you want to detect, if you get this privacy request, that this Aadhaar card belongs to which person, because I have to fulfill the DSR request, right? So it becomes very challenging. Discovering of the data is just one puzzle to the problem. So say you have this Aadhaar card, now you have in that document, say, 5 Anil, right? How do you define that this Aadhaar card I found in this document belongs to Anil 1 or to Anil 3 or to Anil 5? That's one problem. Now you have multiple documents, multiple data sources. How do you do that? How do you find those patterns, correlate the data, and automatically fulfill the DSR request? That's where unsupervised learning comes in very effectively, and supervised learning fails there. Now, as we are talking about, like, you find this data, how do you contextualize the data and correlate the data for your DSR requirements, right? What capabilities it brings in, right? So basically, when you talk about, you can discover the data up to 99%, you can bring that accuracy. What it actually means? There can be false positives in that. So as you are learning the data with these AI models, right? Slowly you are effectively reducing your false positives. You are making it more effectively your models in your environment. Because the financial data is very different from a healthcare data, right? So these models needs to learn as they scan more data, it's learning your environments around that. And that's what it means by the greater reach around that. Now, when we talk about your speed in results, what it means is when you scan these systems, right? You can scan, say, 1 terabyte in 1 hour or maybe 5 terabytes in 1 hour. You can scale up and scale down. The systems needs to be built in that way because when you are scanning petabytes of data, you can't scan it for months and years around that. Now, on the accuracy side, I touched upon on the accuracy, as you are scanning more data, you are learning the environment, your system becomes more accurate around that. Lastly, around on the large data sets, so when you are scanning these systems, what happens is, say you are scanning a production system where, say, you are a financial institution where you store a lot of credit cards, you are processing credit cards, right? So you can't impact on that, right? So system needs to be built in such a way that looking at the load, it can scale down and scale up your scan without impacting your systems. I'll just talk about one of the case study. We helped one of the large IT service company. Now, they operate globally, And their challenge was initially to discover the data and to classify the data. That was the first fundamental thing. Now we helped them in all of that, and then some of the requirements came in like, hey, I want to delete this data from this period to this period. So purging the data for a specific period, for a specific individual, it becomes challenging. So this is one of the cases where we help the organization and we are continuously helping and improving their infrastructure and getting them privacy compliant. As well as like on the DSR side, like they're getting DSR requests not just from one country. It can be Europe, it can be US, and so on. So how do you comply with when you get these requests to delete the data or to get a copy of the data from different jurisdictions? You need to have and comply with their timelines around that. So we help them in doing all of that stuff. If you have any questions, you can come to booth 19 and visit us, and happy to talk. Thank you so much.
We have a token of our appreciation coming out to you. Thank you so much for joining us. That segment looked at the data problem solution landscape. It also spoke about discovering, converting, automating, and complying with the changes that are coming with the data avalanche. It brought our attention towards the ways that will help us overcome the problems, and would also require us to discover, control, manage risks, automate policies within supervised AI, and comply with effective management. There are lots of ways to figure out how to collect, process, and classify data, but clearly it needs a lot of conscious attention. Thank you so much.